In 1453, the unthinkable happened. Constantinople, the jewel of Christendom, the impregnable city that had stood for 1,000 years, fell to the cannons of a 21-year-old sultan, Mehmed II. The world held its breath. With the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, the path to the heart of Europe lay wide open. Mehmed, now known as the Conqueror, turned his gaze westward. His next target, the fortress of Belgrade, the last major bastion standing between the Ottoman Empire and the kingdoms of Hungary and beyond. He famously declared, "To conquer Hungary, I must first take Belgrade. It is the key to their lands." In the summer of 1456, Mehmed arrived at the gates of Belgrade with an army of staggering proportions. Estimates range from 60,000 to over 100,000 elite Ottoman soldiers, veterans of countless campaigns. With them they brought an artillery train the likes of which the world had never seen. 300 massive cannons, including the legendary Basilica, a supergun so large it required hundreds of oxen to move and a crew of hundreds to operate. A fleet of 200 warships patrolled the Danube River, completing a seemingly unbreakable iron ring around the city. The Sultan was so confident of victory that he predicted the fortress would fall within 2 weeks. And who stood against this unstoppable tide? A force that seemed almost laughably inadequate. Inside Belgrade's walls were a mere 10,000 professional soldiers, battle-weary and exhausted. Their commander was the legendary Hungarian general, John Hunyadi, a man who had fought the Ottomans his entire life. But now, he was old, frail, and reportedly dying of illness. The defenders were trapped, outnumbered at least 6-1, and facing certain annihilation. The fate of Christian Europe rested on the shoulders of a dying general and his beleaguered garrison. But there was another, unexpected force gathering. A 70-year-old Franciscan friar named John of Capistrano had traveled through the Hungarian countryside, preaching a crusade. He was no military commander. He was a man of God. Yet, his fiery sermons ignited the spirits of the common people. Tens of thousands of peasants, farmers, blacksmiths, and villagers answered his call. They flocked towards Belgrade, armed not with swords and armor, but with scythes, flails, and whatever farming tools they could carry. This was the army that would stand with Hunyadi, a combined force of exhausted soldiers and 40,000 untrained peasants, led by a dying general and an elderly priest, against the most powerful military machine on earth. The stage was set for one of the most improbable and decisive battles in history. The situation was desperate. The Ottoman fleet controlled the Danube, cutting off any hope of reinforcement or supply for the besieged city. Hunyadi knew that if he couldn't break this naval blockade, Belgrade was doomed. So, he devised a plan that was nothing short of suicidal. On July 14th, he gathered a small flotilla of his own, around 40 small boats and galleys, little more than fishing vessels compared to the massive Ottoman warships. He packed them with flammable materials and, under the cover of the morning mist, sailed directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. The Ottoman commanders watched in disbelief as this tiny force charged them. It was madness, but Hunyadi's men fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They lashed their small boats to the giant Ottoman warships, setting them ablaze. The Danube became a scene of chaos and fire. The disciplined Ottoman fleet, caught by surprise and unable to maneuver their large ships in the confusion, began to break. In a stunning turn of events, Hunyadi's desperate gamble paid off. The blockade was shattered. The river was open. This crucial victory allowed vital reinforcements and supplies to pour into the beleaguered city, raising the defenders' morale from the depths of despair. The first blow had been struck, not by a great army, but by a handful of brave men in small boats. For the next week, Mehmed's giant cannons relentlessly pounded the walls of Belgrade. The thunderous roar was constant, shaking the very foundations of the earth. Day and night, stone and iron rained down upon the city. The outer walls crumbled, turning into massive breaches. The defenders worked tirelessly under the constant bombardment, trying to repair the damage, but it was a losing battle. The fortress was being systematically dismantled. On the night of July 21st, seeing the walls sufficiently weakened, Mehmed ordered the final all-out assault. The elite janissaries, the Sultan's personal infantry, and the most feared soldiers in the world, surged through the breaches into the lower town. They poured into the city, expecting to overwhelm the defenders with their sheer numbers and superior skill. But Hunyadi was a master of strategy. Even on his deathbed, He had anticipated this exact move. Instead of meeting the Janissaries head-on in the breaches, he had pulled his soldiers back, luring them deeper into the city. Then, he gave the order. The Hungarians set fire to the buildings of the lower town, which they had secretly doused with flammable materials. Suddenly, the triumphant advance of the Janissaries turned into a nightmare. The narrow streets became a raging inferno of fire and smoke. Trapped in a labyrinth of flames, choking and disoriented, the Ottomans' numerical advantage became meaningless. The trap had been sprung. Hunyadi's soldiers, who knew the layout of the city, launched a furious counterattack from the shadows, cutting down the confused and panicked Janissaries. The elite of the Ottoman army was being decimated in a fiery hell of Hunyadi's own making. The morning of July 22nd dawned on a scene of carnage. The Ottoman assault had been repulsed, but at a great cost. Mehdi was furious. He prepared for a second, even larger attack. His men began rolling forward, massive siege towers, wooden monstrosities designed to pour soldiers directly onto the remaining walls. But as these towers creaked towards the ramparts, Hunyadi's own artillery, which had been carefully positioned, opened fire. With devastating accuracy, they smashed the siege towers to splinters before they could even reach the walls. The second wave was stopped before it even began. It was at this moment that something completely unplanned and utterly insane happened. From the city, John of Capistrano's peasant crusaders, watching from the walls, were overcome with a zealous against all orders from Hunyadi, who screamed at them to hold their positions. They began to swarm out of the city gates. Armed with their farm tools and religious banners, 40,000 peasants charged directly at the elite Ottoman lines. It was a chaotic, undisciplined, spontaneous tidal wave of humanity. The Ottoman commanders couldn't believe their eyes. This wasn't a military tactic, it was mass suicide. They prepared to slaughter the peasant mob, but Hunyadi, the brilliant strategist, saw an opportunity in the chaos. While the Ottoman army was distracted by the baffling peasant charge, he gathered his last reserve, his heavy cavalry, in a perfectly timed maneuver. He led his knights in a thundering charge that smashed into the flank of the preoccupied Ottoman army. The surprise was absolute. The Ottoman lines, already in disarray from the peasant swarm, now faced a flank attack from some of the best heavy cavalry in Europe. Simultaneously, the peasant crusaders, in their chaotic fervor, had managed to overrun the Ottoman artillery positions. In a staggering turn of fortune, they captured the Sultan's own giant cannons. What happened next sealed the Ottomans' fate. The Hungarian peasants, now in control of the enemy's most powerful weapons, turned the cannons around and began firing them directly into the Ottoman camp. The very heart of Mehmed's army was now being shelled by its own guns. Panic began to spread like wildfire. The disciplined Ottoman army, caught between a cavalry charge on their flank and their own cannons firing on their rear, completely broke. In the midst of the chaos, Sultan Mehmed himself charged into the fray, trying to rally his men. He fought bravely, cutting down several attackers before being struck by an arrow in the thigh and collapsing. A rumor spread through the ranks: the Sultan is dead. This was the final blow. The panic turned into a full-blown, uncontrollable rout. 60,000 of the world's most feared soldiers, the conquerors of Constantinople, threw down their weapons and fled in terror from an army of peasants. They abandoned their camp, their weapons, their treasure, and their 300 cannons. The siege of Belgrade was over. It was a victory so total, so unbelievable, that it seemed miraculous. The Ottomans had suffered catastrophic losses, with some estimates claiming as many as 24,000 killed, compared to only 3,000 of the city's defenders. Mehmed the Conqueror, who had never known defeat, had been utterly humiliated. He returned to his capital in a rage, having lost his army and his aura of invincibility. The key to Europe had held fast. This single battle halted the Ottoman advance into the heart of Europe for the next 70 years. Tragically, the two heroes of the siege would not live to enjoy their victory. A plague broke out in the aftermath of the battle, a common occurrence in camps filled with thousands of unburied bodies. John Hunyadi, the dying general who had orchestrated the masterful defense, succumbed to the illness just 3 weeks after his greatest triumph. His companion, the fiery priest John of Capistrano, followed him in death a few months later. They had saved Christendom, but at the cost of their own lives. When news of the victory reached Rome, Pope Calixtus III was so overjoyed that he ordered the bells of every church in Europe to be rung at noon every day. This was a call for the faithful to pray for the defenders of Belgrade. This tradition, known as the noon bell, has endured for over 500 years and is still practiced in many churches to this day, a ringing echo of one of history's most incredible victories. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of courage against all odds, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales from history. See you next time.